Sarah always thought she and Ethan were just perfectly synced co-workers, a CEO and a talented single dad. Until she heard he had a blind date tonight, and something sharp twisted in her chest. That evening, Sarah followed him to a small restaurant and watched through the window as he handed a beautifully wrapped gift to a stunning woman, their laughter easy and warm. She couldn't stop herself. Sarah walked straight in and said, "Why didn't you ask me out instead?" The woman stared. Ethan went pale, and Sarah realized she might have just destroyed everything. 3 years. That was how long Sarah had worked alongside Ethan, and in all that time, she never let herself think too hard about what he meant to her. He was her director of operations, the single father who showed up every morning with quiet competence and left every evening to pick up his 6-year-old daughter from her grandmother's house. He was reliable. He was calm. He never crossed lines, and neither did she. But lately, something had shifted. Sarah noticed it in small ways. The way her heartbeat picked up when his name appeared on her phone. The way she found excuses to call him into her office for meetings that could have been emails. The way she felt lighter when he laughed at something she said, even if it was not particularly funny. She told herself it was nothing. Just appreciation for a good employee. Just gratitude for someone who understood her work style without needing constant instruction. Still, she could not shake the memory of a night 6 months ago when they had worked late on the quarterly report. The office had been silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning and the soft tapping of keyboards. Around midnight, Ethan had appeared at her door with a cup of coffee, made exactly the way she liked it, 2 sugars and a splash of cream, without her having to ask. He set it down on her desk and said nothing, just gave her a small nod before returning to his own office. That gesture, so simple and so thoughtful, had stayed with her longer than it should have. Then there was the company holiday party 3 months ago. Sarah had been standing near the bar, watching the crowd, when a woman from accounting asked Ethan to dance. He was polite but firm in his refusal, offering some excuse about needing to leave soon to relieve his mother from babysitting. Sarah had felt a strange sense of relief wash over her, and she hated herself for it. What right did she have to feel relieved? He was not hers. He never had been. Now, sitting in the company cafeteria on a cold December afternoon, Sarah stabbed at her salad and tried to focus on the budget spreadsheet open on her laptop. The cafeteria was loud with the buzz of lunchtime conversation, and she usually tuned it out. But today, 2 voices at the table behind her cut through the noise. "Did you hear? Ethan's going on a blind date tonight." It was Jessica from marketing, her tone bright with gossip. Sarah's fork stopped midway to her mouth. "No way. Really?" The second voice belonged to Amy from HR. "I thought he didn't date. He always says he's too busy with his daughter." Jessica laughed. "I know, right? But Linda set it up. Apparently it's a friend of the family or something. She said he finally agreed because his mom's been nagging him about it." Sarah set her fork down slowly, her appetite gone. A blind date. Tonight. She stared at the laptop screen, but the numbers blurred together. Why did it matter? Ethan was allowed to date. He was a grown man, single and perfectly within his rights to meet someone. It had nothing to do with her. And yet, her chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped a band around her ribs and was pulling it tighter with every breath. She closed the laptop and stood, leaving her half-eaten lunch on the table. She needed to get back to her office. She needed to think. Or maybe she needed to stop thinking. Either way, she could not sit there anymore, listening to people discuss Ethan's love life like it was light entertainment. The afternoon dragged. Sarah tried to work, but her focus was shot. She kept glancing through the glass wall of her office toward Ethan's workspace across the hall. He was on a call, leaning back in his chair with the phone pressed to his ear, his expression calm and professional as always. He looked no different than he did on any other day. Whatever nervousness or excitement he might feel about tonight, He hid it well. At 5:30, Sarah made a decision she knew was irrational. She picked up her phone and texted Ethan. "Can you come to my office? Need to go over the Q4 report." The reply came within seconds. "On my way." She told herself it was fine. She was his boss. She had every right to ask for a last-minute meeting. It was not manipulative. It was not desperate. It was just work. Ethan appeared in her doorway a few minutes later, holding a tablet and looking as composed as ever. "You wanted to see me?" he asked, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. Sarah gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Yeah, sit. I wanted to make sure we're aligned on the final projections before we present them to the board next week." He sat down, setting the tablet on his lap, but she noticed the way his eyes flicked to the clock on the wall. It was 5:37. He never checked the time during meetings. "Is everything okay?" Sarah asked, keeping her tone light. Ethan looked back at her and nodded. "Yeah, of course. Just, I have something tonight. I might need to leave by 6 if that's okay." Something tonight. Sarah felt her jaw tighten, but she forced a smile. "Oh. Sure. No problem. This won't take long." Except it did. She stretched the meeting out, asking questions she already knew the answers to, revisiting sections of the report they had finalized days ago. Ethan answered everything patiently, but his gaze kept drifting to the clock. 5:45, 5:52, 5:58. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Sarah, I'm really sorry, but I need to go. I can stay late tomorrow if you want to go over anything else." She looked at him. This man who had been her anchor for 3 years, who had helped her navigate the company's worst financial crisis without flinching, who had never once made her feel like she was alone in the weight of her responsibilities. And now he was rushing off to meet someone else. "Yeah, of course," Sarah said, her voice coming out softer than she intended. "Go ahead." Ethan stood, tucking the tablet under his arm. "Thanks. I'll see you tomorrow." He left quickly, and Sarah watched him through the glass as he grabbed his coat from his office and headed toward the elevator. She stood and moved to the window, looking down at the parking lot below. A few minutes later, she saw him emerge from the building, walking briskly to his car. He opened the door, slid into the driver's seat, and then, before starting the engine, he flipped down the visor and checked his reflection in the mirror. He adjusted his tie, ran a hand through his hair, and took a breath. Sarah's hands curled into fists at her sides. She had no right to feel this way, no right at all, but watching him prepare himself for another woman felt like a knife twisting in her chest. Before she could talk herself out of it, she grabbed her purse and coat and headed for the elevator. The drive was surreal. Sarah stayed 2 cars behind Ethan's sedan, her heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with traffic. She did not know what she was doing. She did not know what she would do when she got wherever he was going. All she knew was that she could not sit in her office and pretend this was not happening. She could not let him walk into someone else's life without at least knowing who that person was. Ethan pulled into the parking lot of a small Italian restaurant on the edge of downtown, the kind of place with string lights in the windows and a handwritten menu on a chalkboard outside. Sarah parked across the street and killed the engine. Through the restaurant's large front window, she could see him already sitting at a table near the back. And across from him was a woman. She was young, maybe late 20s, with dark hair pulled into a sleek ponytail and a red dress that fit her perfectly. She was smiling, leaning forward slightly as she spoke, her hands animated. Ethan smiled back, and then he reached into the bag beside his chair and pulled out a small wrapped box. He slid it across the table. The woman's face lit up. She took the box, unwrapped it carefully, and then pulled out a scarf. Soft and cream-colored, clearly expensive. She stood, walked around the table, and threw her arms around Ethan's shoulders in a hug. He laughed, patting her back. Sarah felt like she was watching the scene through water. Everything was distorted, too bright and too slow at the same time. Her chest ached. Her throat burned. She gripped the steering wheel so hard her knuckles turned white. This was it. This was the woman he chose. Someone younger, warmer, easier to love than a workaholic CEO who had never once let her guard down around him. She should leave. She should start the car and drive home and pretend she had never followed him here. She should let him have this. But her hand was already on the door handle, and before she could think it through, she was stepping out onto the sidewalk. The cold December air bit at her skin, but she barely felt it. She crossed the street, pushed open the restaurant door, and walked inside. The warmth of the restaurant hit her first, along with the smell of garlic and fresh bread. A hostess looked up, startled, but Sarah did not stop. She walked straight toward the back, her heels clicking against the tile floor. Ethan looked up, and his expression froze. The woman turned in her seat, confusion flickering across her face. Sarah stopped at the edge of their table. Her heart was racing so fast she thought she might pass out, but her voice came out steady. "Why didn't you ask me out instead?" The words hung in the air. Ethan's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The woman blinked, her smile fading into bewilderment. Sarah felt the eyes of the entire restaurant on her, but she could not stop now. She turned to the woman, forcing herself to stay calm. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, and she meant it. "I know this is incredibly rude, and I have no right to be here. But I need to say this. I like him. I've liked him for a long time, and I can't just sit back and watch him go on a date with someone else without telling him." She looked back at Ethan, and her voice cracked slightly. "I know I'm your boss. I know this is inappropriate, but I can't accept the fact that you're here with someone else when you never once asked me. Not even once." The silence that followed was suffocating. And then, to Sarah's absolute horror, the woman started to laugh. Not a cruel laugh, but a genuine, surprised laugh. Ethan covered his face with one hand, his shoulders shaking, and Sarah realized he was laughing too. Her face burned. She had just humiliated herself in front of a room full of strangers, and they were laughing at her. "I should go," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. She turned to leave, but Ethan was already on his feet. "Sarah, wait." His hand caught her wrist gently. "Please, sit down." She shook her head, unable to look at him. "I made a mistake. I shouldn't have come here." The woman stood too, still smiling, and extended her hand toward Sarah. "Hi, I'm Rebecca, Ethan's sister." Sarah's world tilted. "Sister?" Rebecca nodded, her eyes kind. "Yeah, I just got back from 4 years in France. This is the first time I've seen my brother in person since I left. The scarf was my Christmas gift from Paris." She glanced at Ethan, then back at Sarah. "This isn't a date. It's just dinner with family." Sarah felt the floor drop out from under her. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to rewind the last 5 minutes and make different choices. But there was no going back. Ethan was still holding her wrist, his grip gentle but firm. "Sarah," he said quietly. "Please sit down." Sarah stood frozen, staring at Rebecca's outstretched hand like it was something dangerous. Sister. The word echoed in her head, but it did not make sense yet. Her brain was still stuck on the image she had seen through the window, the hug, the laughter, the intimacy of it all. She had been so certain. Rebecca's smile softened with understanding. She let her hand drop and glanced at Ethan. "I think I'm going to head out. Lily's still at Mom's, and I promised I'd pick her up before 8. Ethan started to protest, but Rebecca was already gathering her coat and purse. She leaned down and kissed his cheek, then turned to Sarah one more time. "It was really nice to meet you, Sarah. My brother talks about you all the time." Before Sarah could process that statement, Rebecca was gone, weaving through the tables toward the exit. The door chimed as it closed behind her, and suddenly it was just Sarah and Ethan standing awkwardly beside a table set for two. Ethan gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Please, sit." Sarah shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "I should go. This was a mistake." But Ethan's hand was still loosely around her wrist, not restraining her, just anchoring her. "Sarah, please don't leave like this." There was something in his voice, something raw and exposed, that made her stop. She looked up at him, and for the first time in 3 years, she saw past the calm professionalism he always wore like armor. He looked rattled, vulnerable, almost as lost as she felt. Against every instinct screaming at her to run, Sarah sat down. Ethan released her wrist and took his seat across from her, his hands folding on the table. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the restaurant surrounded them, the clinking of silverware, the low murmur of conversation, the soft jazz playing from overhead speakers. It all felt distant, like they were sitting in a bubble, separate from the rest of the world. "I'm sorry," Sarah finally said, her voice tight. "I don't know what I was thinking. I heard you had a blind date, and I just—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence because she did not know how to explain what she had been thinking. That she had been jealous? That she had followed him like some obsessed teenager? That she had convinced herself she had the right to interrupt his personal life? Ethan leaned forward slightly, his eyes searching hers. "You thought I was on a date?" It was not a question. Sarah nodded, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "The people at work were talking about it. They said Linda set you up with someone. I thought—" She stopped again, hating how small her voice sounded. "I thought you were here with someone you liked." A strange expression crossed Ethan's face, something between amusement and disbelief. "And what exactly did you plan to do about it?" The question caught her off guard. Sarah looked down at her hands, twisting them together in her lap. "I don't know. I wasn't thinking. I just couldn't stand the idea of you being with someone else and me never having said anything." "Said what?" Ethan's voice was quiet, careful. Sarah's throat tightened. She had already humiliated herself once tonight. What was one more confession? She forced herself to meet his eyes. "That I have feelings for you. That I've had them for a while now, and I've been too afraid to say anything because you're my employee, and I'm your boss, and there are 1,000 reasons why it's a terrible idea." The words hung between them, and Sarah waited for him to pull back, to say something kind but dismissive, to remind her of all those reasons she had just listed. Instead, Ethan's expression shifted into something she could not quite read. He looked down at the table, his jaw working like he was trying to find the right words. "You want to know something?" he said finally, his voice low. "I've been telling myself the same thing for 3 years. Sarah's breath caught. "What?" Ethan looked up, and the vulnerability in his eyes nearly undid her. "That it's a terrible idea. That you're my boss, and I'm your subordinate, and it would complicate everything. That I'm a single father with a 6-year-old daughter, and that's not exactly an appealing package. That you deserve someone who can give you their full attention, not someone who has to leave every meeting by 6 to pick up his kid." He ran a hand through his hair, a rare break in his usually composed demeanor. "I've been telling myself all of that every single day, and it hasn't changed the fact that I look for you every morning when I get to the office, that I make excuses to stop by your door, that every time you smile at something I say, it makes my entire day better." Sarah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Then why didn't you ever say anything?" "For the same reason you didn't," Ethan said simply. "Because I was afraid. afraid of making things awkward between us, afraid of losing the one person at work I actually trust, afraid that if I said something and you didn't feel the same way, I'd have to leave, and I can't afford to leave. Not with Lily depending on me." His voice cracked slightly on his daughter's name, and Sarah saw the weight he carried, the responsibility that shaped every decision he made. She thought about the coffee he had brought her that night 6 months ago, made exactly the way she liked it. She thought about the way he always stood slightly behind her in board meetings, a silent show of support. She thought about the countless small kindnesses he had shown her, gestures she had convinced herself were just professionalism. "I never thought you'd feel the same way," Sarah admitted. "I thought I was just your boss, someone you respected but didn't actually see." Ethan shook his head slowly. "Sarah, I've seen you. I've always seen you." The simplicity of the statement hit her harder than any grand declaration could have. She felt something break open in her chest, a wall she had been building for 3 years, suddenly crumbling. "So what do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Before Ethan could answer, a waiter appeared at their table, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but did you still want to order, or—" Ethan glanced at Sarah, a question in his eyes. She realized they were still sitting at his table, the one he had reserved for dinner with his sister. She should leave. She should let him finish his evening. But she did not want to. Not anymore. "Actually," Ethan said, looking back at the waiter, "could we get another menu? And maybe a glass of wine for the lady?" The waiter nodded, clearly relieved to have a simple task, and hurried off. Ethan turned back to Sarah. "Stay. Please, we should talk about this properly." Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The waiter returned with a menu and a wine list, and for the next few minutes they went through the motions of ordering food neither of them was particularly hungry for. When the waiter left again, the silence returned, but it felt different now, less suffocating, almost comfortable. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said after a moment. Sarah nodded. "When did you start having feelings for me? Was it recent, or—" He seemed genuinely curious, like he was trying to piece together a puzzle he had not realized existed. Sarah thought about it, tracing back through the months. "I think it was that night you brought me coffee. The one with 2 sugars and cream, even though I'd never told you how I take it." Ethan smiled slightly. "You mentioned it once, about a year before that. We were in a meeting with the financial team, and someone had brought the wrong order from the coffee shop. You said you couldn't drink it because it wasn't sweet enough." Sarah stared at him. "You remembered that?" "I remember a lot of things you've said," Ethan replied quietly. "Probably more than I should." The admission sent a warmth spreading through her chest. She had spent so long thinking she was alone in this, that her feelings were one-sided and foolish. But here he was, telling her he had been paying attention all along, that he had been feeling the same things. "What about you?" Sarah asked. "When did you start seeing me as more than just your boss?" Ethan's expression grew thoughtful. "Honestly, I think it was the day you hired me. I came in for the interview and I was a mess. I'd just finalized my divorce. I had a 4-year-old daughter I was trying to figure out how to raise alone, and I was barely holding it together. Every other company I interviewed at looked at me like I was a liability. But you—" He stopped, his gaze steady on hers. "You asked me if I needed the company to provide any support for childcare. You asked if flexible hours would help. You saw me as a person, not just a resume." Sarah remembered that interview. She had seen something in Ethan that day, a quiet strength beneath the exhaustion. She had wanted to help him, not out of pity, but because she recognized someone who was trying their best against impossible odds. "I just did what any decent employer should do," she said softly. "Maybe," Ethan agreed. "But it meant something to me, and over the years, every time you showed that same kindness, that same understanding, it got harder to keep my feelings professional. He looked down at his hands. I kept telling myself it was just gratitude, that I was confusing respect with something else. But then there were moments, like at the holiday party, when someone asked me to dance, and all I could think was that I wished it was you asking. Sarah's heart skipped. She remembered that night, remembered the relief she had felt when he turned the woman down. She had not let herself examine why she felt that way. "I was relieved when you said no," she confessed. "I told myself it was because I didn't want you distracted from work, but that wasn't it at all." Ethan met her eyes, and something passed between them, an understanding that needed no words. Their food arrived, and they ate slowly, the conversation shifting to safer topics, but never losing the undercurrent of everything they had just admitted. Sarah learned that Rebecca had been studying art history in Paris and was planning to open a gallery in the city. Ethan told her about Lily's obsession with dinosaurs and how his mother had been helping him raise her ever since the divorce. The more they talked, the more Sarah realized how much of his life he had kept separate from work, not out of secrecy, but out of necessity. When the check came, they both reached for it at the same time. Their hands brushed, and neither of them pulled away immediately. "Let me," Sarah said. "I'm the one who crashed your dinner." Ethan smiled, but there was something sad in it. "Sarah, we need to talk about what happens next. I meant what I said. I have feelings for you, but I also have a daughter, and I have a job that I can't afford to lose. If we do this, if we try to make this something real, it's going to be complicated." Sarah nodded, understanding the weight of what he was saying. "I know, and I'm not asking you to make any decisions tonight, but I need you to know that I'm willing to figure it out, whatever it takes." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, and then he stood, offering his hand. "Come on, let's get out of here." They walked out of the restaurant into the cold December night, and Sarah felt the shift in temperature like a shock to her system. The street was quiet, decorated with white lights strung between lampposts, casting a soft glow over the sidewalk. A light snow had started to fall, small flakes that disappeared the moment they touched the ground. Ethan walked beside her, his hands in his coat pockets, and for a while neither of them spoke. Sarah did not know where they were going. Her car was parked across the street, but she did not move toward it. Ethan seemed content to just walk, so she followed his lead. They turned down a side street lined with small shops, most of them closed for the evening, their windows dark except for the holiday displays still lit from within. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, but it was heavy with everything they had said inside the restaurant and everything they had not yet figured out how to say. After a few minutes, Ethan stopped in front of a small flower shop. Through the window, Sarah could see buckets of roses and lilies arranged in neat rows, their colors muted in the dim light. Ethan glanced at her, then pushed open the door. A small bell chimed, and an older woman behind the counter looked up from a bouquet she was wrapping. "We're about to close," she said, but her tone was not unkind. Ethan nodded. "I just need one. A red rose, if you have it." The woman studied him for a moment, then smiled and walked to one of the buckets. She pulled out a single long-stemmed rose, its petals deep crimson, and wrapped the stem in brown paper. $6, she said. Ethan handed her a $10 bill and told her to keep the change. The woman thanked him, and they stepped back out into the cold. Ethan turned to Sarah and held out the rose. She took it, her fingers brushing his, and felt the thorns press lightly against her palm through the paper. "What's this for?" she asked, her voice soft. Ethan looked at her, and there was something different in his expression now, something more certain. "I want to ask you something, and I want to do it the right way this time." Sarah's heart started to beat faster. Ethan took a breath, his gaze steady on hers. "Sarah, would you go out with me? Not as your employee, not as someone you work with, just as a man who's wanted to ask you this for a long time but didn't have the courage until you showed up tonight and made me realize I was wasting time being afraid." The words settled over her like the snow, soft and unexpected and perfect. She looked down at the rose in her hands, then back up at him. "Yes," she said simply. "I'd like that." Ethan smiled, and it was the kind of smile she had never seen on him before, open and unguarded. He reached out and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. They started walking again, slower this time, and Sarah felt something loosen in her chest. For 3 years she had carried this weight, this fear of saying the wrong thing or crossing a line she could not uncross. And now, with her hand in his, it felt like the simplest thing in the world. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said after a while. Ethan glanced at her. "Of course." She hesitated, then decided there was no point in holding back now. "What about work? What about the fact that I'm still your boss and people are going to talk?" Ethan slowed to a stop, turning to face her fully. "People are always going to talk, Sarah. That's not something we can control, but what we can control is how we handle it. We keep things professional at the office. We don't give anyone a reason to question your judgment or my competence, and if it gets to a point where it becomes a problem, then we figure it out together." Sarah nodded, but she could see the worry in his eyes, the same worry that had kept him silent for so long. "And what about Lily?" she asked quietly. "I know she's your priority, and I would never ask you to change that. But if we do this, I need to know what that looks like. I've never been a part of a child's life before. I don't want to mess that up." Ethan's expression softened. "Lily's been through a lot in the last 2 years. Her mom left, and she doesn't really understand why. My mother's been amazing, but Lily knows it's not the same as having 2 parents. I'm not asking you to be her mother, Sarah, but if this is going to work, then eventually she's going to be part of your life too, and I need to know that you're okay with that." Sarah thought about the little girl she had never met, the one Ethan picked up every evening, the one whose drawings he kept pinned to the corkboard in his office. She thought about what it would mean to be with someone who had a child, the responsibility and the complications, and the fact that she would never come first. And she realized that none of it scared her as much as the thought of walking away from Ethan now. "I'm okay with it," she said. "I don't know how to be good at it yet, but I'm willing to try, and I'm willing to take it slow, for her sake." Ethan's grip on her hand tightened. "That's all I can ask." They started walking again, and Sarah felt the tension that had been building all night finally start to ease. They talked about small things, about Rebecca's plans for her gallery, about Lily's upcoming school holiday concert, about the board meeting next week that they both knew was going to be difficult. The conversation flowed easily, the way it always had between them, but now there was something more beneath it, a closeness that had been there all along, but was finally allowed to exist. When they reached Sarah's car, she did not want the night to end. She leaned against the driver's side door, still holding the rose, and looked up at Ethan. "What happens now?" she asked. Ethan stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him even through the cold air. "Now, I ask if I can kiss you," he said quietly. "And you tell me if that's okay." Sarah's breath caught. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Ethan reached up and brushed a strand of hair away from her face, his touch gentle. Then he leaned in, and his lips met hers. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, like they were both still afraid of breaking something fragile. But then Sarah's free hand came up to rest against his chest, and Ethan's arm wrapped around her waist, and the kiss deepened. It was not desperate or rushed. It was the kind of kiss that had been waiting 3 years to happen, and now that it finally was, there was no need to hurry. When they pulled apart, Sarah rested her forehead against his, her eyes closed. "I can't believe I followed you here tonight," she whispered. Ethan laughed softly, his breath warm against her skin. "I can't believe it took you this long." She opened her eyes and saw him smiling at her, and she smiled back. "So, what now? Do we just go back to work on Monday and pretend this didn't happen?" Ethan shook his head. "No. We go back to work, and we figure out how to do this right. We tell HR. We make sure everything is above board. And then we see where this goes." Sarah nodded, feeling a strange mix of nervousness and relief. "Okay, we do it right." They stood there for another moment, neither of them ready to let go, until finally Ethan stepped back. "You should get home. It's late." Sarah unlocked her car but did not get in yet. "Ethan?" He looked at her, his expression open and honest in a way she had never seen before tonight. "Thank you," she said, "for not making me feel stupid for showing up tonight." Ethan smiled. "You weren't stupid. You were brave, and I'm glad you did." Sarah got into her car, and Ethan closed the door for her. She started the engine and rolled down the window. "I'll see you Monday?" she asked. "You will," Ethan said. He reached through the window and squeezed her hand once, then stepped back. Sarah drove away, watching him in the rearview mirror until he disappeared from view. The following Monday morning, Sarah arrived at the office early. She had spent the weekend thinking about what Ethan had said, about doing things the right way. Before anyone else arrived, she called Linda from HR and asked her to come to her office. Linda arrived 15 minutes later, looking curious. "Is everything okay?" she asked as she sat down. Sarah took a breath. "I need to disclose something. Ethan and I have started seeing each other. I know there are policies about relationships between supervisors and their direct reports, and I want to make sure we handle this correctly." Linda's eyes widened slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Okay. Well, the company does have a policy. You'll need to fill out a disclosure form, and we'll need to put some boundaries in place to avoid any conflicts of interest. Depending on the situation, we might need to reassign one of you to a different department or adjust the reporting structure." Sarah nodded. She had expected as much. "I understand. I want to do whatever is necessary to make sure this doesn't compromise either of our positions." Linda made some notes on her tablet. "I'll draw up the paperwork and send it to you by this afternoon. In the meantime, I'd recommend keeping things as professional as possible at the office. No public displays of affection, no favoritism, and make sure any decisions involving Ethan go through me or another member of the executive team for approval." Sarah agreed, and Linda left. An hour later, Ethan arrived. He stopped by Sarah's office, knocking lightly on the open door. "Morning," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "Morning," Sarah replied, but she could not help the small smile that tugged at her lips. Ethan stepped inside and closed the door. "Did you talk to HR?" Sarah nodded. "Linda's sending over the disclosure paperwork this afternoon. She also mentioned we might need to adjust the reporting structure." Ethan leaned against the edge of her desk. "I figured as much. I'm okay with that, if it means we can do this without any issues." Sarah looked up at him, and for a moment they just held each other's gaze. Then Ethan smiled. "I should get back to work. I have a meeting in 10 minutes. He started to leave, but Sarah called after him. "Ethan." He turned back. "Yeah?" She stood and walked around the desk, stopping just in front of him. "I'm really glad we're doing this." Ethan's smile widened. "Me too." He reached out and squeezed her hand briefly, then left. Sarah watched him go, feeling lighter than she had in years. Over the next few weeks, they navigated the new reality of their relationship. At work, they were professional, keeping their interactions limited to what was necessary. But after hours, they met for dinner, went to movies, took long walks through the city. Ethan introduced Sarah to Lily slowly, first as a friend from work, then as someone he was spending time with. Lily was shy at first, clinging to her father's side and eyeing Sarah with the kind of suspicion only a 6-year-old could muster. But Sarah was patient, asking Lily about her favorite dinosaurs and listening intently to the long, rambling stories the little girl told. One evening, a month after that night at the restaurant, Ethan invited Sarah to his mother's house for dinner. It was the first time she would be meeting his family in any official capacity, and she was nervous. But when she arrived, Rebecca opened the door with a wide grin. "Sarah, finally, someone interesting to talk to." She pulled Sarah into a hug, and Sarah laughed despite her nerves. Ethan's mother, a warm woman in her 60s named Margaret, welcomed her just as warmly. And Lily, who had been sitting on the floor playing with toy dinosaurs, looked up and said, "You're the lady who likes Triceratops." Sarah smiled. "That's right." Lily considered this, then held up one of her toys. "Do you want to play?" And just like that, Sarah knew they were going to be okay. The evening passed in a blur of laughter and conversation, and when it was time to leave, Ethan walked Sarah to her car. "That went well," he said, sounding relieved. Sarah nodded. "Your family is wonderful." Ethan pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her. "I'm really glad you're here," he said quietly. Sarah rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Me too." They stood there for a while, holding each other under the glow of the porch light, and Sarah thought about how much had changed in just a few weeks. She had spent so long being afraid, so long convincing herself that what she felt was impossible. But here she was, standing in the driveway of Ethan's mother's house, being held by a man who saw her for who she really was. Sometimes the thing standing between you and happiness is not circumstance or timing or any of the logical reasons you tell yourself. Sometimes it is just fear, and the only way through it is to be brave enough to say what you feel, even if you do not know how the story will end. Life is too short to wait for someone else to take the first step. Sometimes you have to be the one to walk into the restaurant and ask the question that terrifies you. And sometimes, if you are lucky, the answer is worth every second of fear.
Thank you for listening to this story until the end. Hopefully every moment, every detail in the story has brought you emotions, thoughts, and maybe a little joy or motivation. Thank you for spending time with us, and hope that the next stories will continue to accompany you and touch your heart.